Jumbo Habari Gani. It is MagMongoSlade. Voices of Wrestling. Gotta be the most condescending batch of know-it-all dweebs that has ever participated in anything. There is no field of athletics or theater that attracts these kinds of people like pro wrestling. So today, these condescending bastards are going to tell us what pro wrestling is. They wrote an article. Abraham Delgado, welcome to Pro Wrestling, a reminder of what it is. On Voices of Wrestling. They're going to tell us what pro wrestling is. Oh my God. Shall we learn together? Because I think we've been doing this all wrong all this time. It starts out, welcome to Pro Wrestling. I'm glad you have been watching this for however long you have. We at Voices of Wrestling won't judge you if you are new, even though we are in the business of directing you to essential matches to watch. And it's a hyperlink to something else that they put together. I didn't click this link because I'm almost certain 90% of it is Japanese stuff. But that's okay. I don't hate Japan. You know, I'm okay with Japan. Japan's cool with me. He says pro wrestling has been in a kind of strange place lately, especially in the United States. We have murderers, nonsensical authority figures, wrestlers obsessed with bracelets, mid-match promos, magic, wrestlers afraid to use finishing moves, never-ending struggles about heads of tables that lead nowhere, romance, and all kinds of shenanigans. Plot holes all over the place. Hell, in 2023, AEW was powered by the power of friendship over everything else. If you are new, you might be like, this is what pro wrestling is all about. Drama and comedy with matches sometimes. Well, we need to have a chat. It seems that pro wrestling has lost its way due to the chase of the almighty story. You're not allowed to have stories in pro wrestling now. Okay. Considering the reason why all of these sites exist is because people decided that matches should have a reason to happen, and that if you have a match and there's a reason to have that match, more people will want to see it. I mean, it's just like in, boxing or baseball or basketball or something like that. If people are interested in the game before the game, you're interested in the players, the playoff positioning or whatever, then you are more likely to watch the game. You're more likely to care if there's stakes involved. But we've been doing it wrong. Let's see what we've been doing wrong. He says, let's start with the basics. What is pro wrestling? Okay, what is it? It is a pseudo sport in which two or more people beat each other to find out who is the strongest and the best at their craft. Sometimes it gets too personal. Things get out of control and feuds happen. Sometimes these feuds get bloody. But this is all a normal part of being in a competition. Okay. It is indeed a pseudo sport. Sometimes you do want to see who's the best, but it's a pseudo sport. You're not going to decide who's the best because everyone knows it's a work. See, this concept probably would have worked at some point between the late 1800s and the mid 19 teens, before the business was pretty much exposed everywhere as being a work. Therefore, nobody really believes that the best wrestler or the person who won the match is usually the best wrestler because it's a work. So there is no objective way to prove who is the best. It's just you work and you lose if they tell you to lose, and you win if they tell you to win. That's the long and the short of it. It's a work. How do you objectively know who is the best wrestler or who's the best at their craft if the guy is losing because he was told to lose? I don't know. Well, let's see if he explained this. He says, just like any sport, there are variations. Some wrestlers prefer hardcore matches, others technical, and others prefer styles from other parts of the world. It's a fun potpourri of styles. An ice cream store, if you will. Pause. If it's a pseudo sport, like it's a sport, why would you hit somebody with a chair? You never see that in a football game. Why is there a variation of a sport where you hit somebody with a chair? Why is there a variation of a sport in which you use barbed wire? There is no variation of football, American football, in which tables, chairs, barbed wire, or fire is involved. Even if you want to say rugby, still no weapons are allowed. If this was supposed to be a sport, there would be no weapons. There are no weapons in sports, period. I've been watching the Olympics. I didn't see anybody in the judo competition stabbing each other with screwdrivers. I didn't see that. It didn't occur. I don't know, man. He says, at its core, it's people trying to beat each other up while being a good sport about it. There, simple, but let's explain a little bit more. It's people trying to beat each other up and being a good sport about it. That's sports. That's judo competitions. That's Olympic wrestling. That's American football. That's rugby. That's not what pro wrestling is. Pro wrestling is a work. The point is to look like you're beating each other up, and you're really not. That's the point that's the pseudo sport of the pseudo sport. There is no real winners and losers. It's described beforehand. And you're not really supposed to cave somebody's chest in with your hand. You're not supposed to kick them in the face for real. You're not supposed to drop them on their head for real. It's all an illusion. But these guys are know-it-alls. They know everything. So let's let them continue to educate us. I'm going to skip through some of this. He said, what is the end goal? Money, pride, and a beautiful shining belt that says you are the best. Okay. Sometimes fans complain about a match not having a story. But have you ever thought that maybe the wrestler does it because it's their job? What about taking pride in your craft? I don't see fans asking, why are the Yankees playing the Reds? They don't have a story. I don't see plumbers going, I'm not doing that house. I only take care of apartments. Well, for starters, plumbers do specialize. Some do hotels, some do apartments, some do only houses. Plumbers, they specialize. We're going to put that to the side, though. You want to compare baseball to pro wrestling. Well, baseball has a limited number of games per year, and they decide one champion. That's it. That's it. I don't know how many baseball games it is. What is it? 130 or something like that? There's a lot of baseball games. They play sometimes 2 baseball games a day. All right? But ultimately, the idea is to get more wins than the other teams in your division. Become the divisional champion, then become the conference champion, and then become the world champion. But that's only decided once per year. So in pro wrestling, however, the world champion is not decided once per year. All other sports decide the world champion once per year. Once. The NBA Finals only comes one time. The Super Bowl only comes one time. The World Series, one time. That's it. That's it. So if you want to try to make it an apples to apples comparison, you're already failing. You're already off. In real sports, those athletes get time off. They play in seasons. And the world champion is decided once per year. That's it. So, by, I guess, this formulation that this guy is dumping on us, we shouldn't have Monday Night Raw 52 weeks a year. It should be instead 30 weeks a year or whatever. And then we decide the world champion at WrestleMania, then that's it. Let's continue. He said, do you know what else does not have a story? Most Olympic events and your company's softball game. Pause. Olympic events do have stories. They do. Sometimes you'll go into an Olympic event and an individual has a story. I'm trying to remember the giant French guy who won the judo competition, right? It was an amazing story going into the finals. It was France versus Japan. Japan went up 3. It was the final, so it was a team-based thing, all the weight classes against each other. It was the first to 4, I think, that you have to win, or first to 3 or something like that. You have to win the majority of the teams or whatever. So Japan went up like 3-2 or something like that. But there's an unbeatable, gigantic French judo player, right? He had already won the gold medal. And they do what's called golden score, which is if there are no points at the end of a judo match, the first one to score wins. It's like an overtime, right? So France caught up to Japan in the team finals for the gold medal. And it all started with the Japanese guy who lost. And he ended up, the French team ended up catching up. They won enough games in the team final to go to golden score, which is the finals of the finals, right? So that means everybody has already fought and they have to fight again, right? So everybody has fought and it comes out equal. So they did a random generator of who was going to decide who the champion is going to be. And it ended up being the unbeatable French guy versus a Japanese dude he's already beaten, I think, twice already. And then they fight until the very end and they get to the golden score. And then the giant French guy won again. And they were in a French building because the Olympics is in Paris. The place just absolutely exploded because the judo team came from behind and the hero, he was already basically a national hero in judo, won at the end. That's real sports, by the way. That's real sports. Yeah, I had to watch a lot of stuff that, a lot of Kyrgyzstans and Armenians and stuff like this to get to that point. But it was an amazing story. And what's even better about this story is that Japan, judo is one of the national sports over there. They started judo. They were number 1 in the world and they lost to France in the finals. And the first Japanese guy to lose, he was on his side crying that they got a silver medal because he is the first one to lose. He figured if I would have won, we would have been gold. He was on his side crying. That's sports. All right? ESPN is all about the story of sports. And it's about the players, the statistics, the significance of the building, whether, the player went to college near that arena, whether his family's going to be there, all that kind of stuff is involved. And in collegiate sports, in the NCAA, you got the little brown jug, like Michigan and Minnesota football. You got a bunch of other, I guess you could say, what's the word I'm looking for? Unauthorized cups or divisional rival games and stuff like this. That stuff exists. The Michigan-Ohio State football game, it's a tradition. It's a rivalry between the two schools or whatever. That's the story. Every Michigan football game is being sized up by people who like Ohio State and vice versa, thinking, can we beat them this year? Stories run all through sports. Okay. Sorry, I went on a tangent. Let's get back to this article. He says, being a champion is a guaranteed spot in an important part of the card, which is in turn more merch sales, more popularity since you are being exposed to the whole world, and you are more important to the company, which comes in handy in those contract negotiations. But those are not real contract negotiations, and the championship is not real because it's a work. The tag team champions of WWE have not been on a pay-per-view since WrestleMania. Okay? And just because you're a winner and you're a champion doesn't mean you're a draw. Those things are not automatic. You can be world champion and not be a draw. You can be the tag team champion and not be a draw. And therefore, you don't really sell merchandise. And therefore, nobody really cares when your contract comes up. It's not the same thing, okay? So now he's going to try to voice-splain us, wrestle-splain, baby faces and heels. He's going to say, some wrestlers are fair and have a love for it. They take pride in their craft and in being the best either in their promotion, the country, or the world. Others are like you at your work, want to do the bare minimum, like reading wrestling columns at work, which is what I'm doing really right now, legitimately, or writing a column instead of working and get more. These wrestlers do the bare minimum by cheating and using help to try to get up in the card and win a championship. Since they know they all need wins to advance, they get a manager or a couple of other cheaters to help out. Or maybe they are just unsportsmanlike, and that helps them win. Okay, this is the most sensible thing that he said. You know, people like to cut corners. People cut corners in real sports all the time. And he says, these are the basics of pro wrestling. We have been straying from it for a while, especially in the United States. Sometimes it seems like even the wrestlers don't know why they wrestle. We have murder clowns who have magic, yet they never use it in their matches or explain why they are in pro wrestling instead of, I don't know, a Las Vegas show, which is way more profitable. Pause, because this guy obviously is a Japanophile. Antonio Inoki, for instance, right? Big on martial arts. Never did martial arts. Never went and did a shoot fight. Never. You know, the one fight that he did have was Muhammad Ali, and he crouched and kicked him in the leg for 15 minutes and destroyed his legs. He pushed other people to get into legitimate fights. You know, Inokiism was a real thing, right? They pushed these guys into doing legitimate martial arts. And a lot of them got their shit kicked in. Some of them went on to do okay, because in Japan, they fluidly go back and forth between pro wrestling and MMA, and some of those pro wrestling companies, a lot of those stiff promotions like UWF, or even to a degree Pride, or even K1, there's some work involved in all of that. You're not supposed to know that, but it is. All right. So even if you want to say that America is the problem, you're telling me all these guys who know judo and taekwondo and martial, they don't use that stuff in pro wrestling. And in pro wrestling in Japan is actually very silly. Blow up dolls, children. There's all kinds of crazy stuff over in Japan. I recently just saw somebody wrestle like a gigantic inflatable dinosaur or something like that over there. It gets pretty crazy over there. Let's not single out the states. You know, it's just pro wrestling in general. It gets kind of silly. Okay, so he continues by saying, we have wrestlers stopping their matches and doing soliloquies, giving time for their opponent to recuperate. Have they never seen a spy movie? Telling the whole plan and explaining everything never works. Or maybe the promotions doing these things think their fans are dumb and need an explainer all the time. Have you ever seen, I don't know, a basketball game where basketball players jaw jack to each other all the time while pushing each other on the court? You know, that's how jaw jacking in wrestling works. That's kind of, he's really taking a shot at Roman Reigns, but that's how it works. He walks around talking shit because that's what athletes do. You ever seen somebody sack a quarterback and start yelling and dancing and getting in people's faces and all that kind of stuff? It's the same thing. It's just a shorter amount of time. Wrestling just dramatizes things that occur in real sports. That's what it does. All right? It makes it more dramatic. It draws things out. The entrances are more drawn out. The athletic element is a little bit more, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? It is more dramatic, let's say. Let's just be redundant. It's more dramatic, all right? So he says, some are afraid to do finishing moves, which is the antithesis of pro wrestling. It's like you're playing baseball. You play against your friend's team and are afraid of doing a home run because you don't want to embarrass your buddy or hurt your enemy too much. You just said it's supposed to be sportsmanlike. That's the whole story with Will Ospreay, and I don't necessarily care for it. But it's showing you that Will Ospreay actually doesn't want to kill anybody. He wants to win a match, and there's 100 ways for him to win a match. He doesn't want to use that one move because it may injure somebody. You just went through this trouble of explaining to me that some people are good sportsmen and they're fair, and now you're telling me that being a good sportsman and being fair is wrong. And it's not the same thing as hitting a home run. A home run doesn't kill anybody. Dropping people on their head might kill them. This is not, I don't want to do a slam dunk. I don't want to embarrass anybody. It's not about embarrassment. He's telling you, if I pick this guy up and drop him on his head, he could break his neck. And that's legit. If you've seen it, you know it's you can't fake gravity. All right? That's one thing you can't fake. And of course, he's going to end up doing it in the end. That's part of the story. But you keep trying to be a smart ass, and you're too smart by half, brother. So he says, we have wrestlers committing crimes on TV all the time. Cameras in places they normally aren't. Bad comedy. All in the name of overcomplicating shit. Of chasing the almighty story. There's cameras pretty much everywhere in sports. There's cameras in the locker room. There's cameras on the sideline. There's cameras on the referees. There's cameras on the drones going by. There's cameras on the rims in basketball. There's cameras everywhere. You know, there's cameras everywhere. Now, you could say, well, they're committing crimes, man. They're doing dastardly things, man. Okay, so what? It's a dramatized version of sports. Just like you got, remember there's been a whole thing about women in men's locker rooms. That used to be a whole thing. Nobody even argues about that anymore. They just go in there, and there's a bunch of guys back there with their shirts off, and here's some lady sticking a microphone in your face. I mean, there's already cameras backstage. So what if she captures somebody getting into an argument? Is that somehow less valid? He said, people forget that what makes pro wrestling special and awesome is that it's simple. It tells a story with wrestlers' bodies and on the mic with promos designed to get you pumped to go to the arena. That's the magic of it all. That is what makes pro wrestling a different art form from cinema. Now, sometimes you can do more complicated stuff, but wrestlers need to behave like human beings and must be logical. If it was logical, you wouldn't be watching pro wrestling in the first place. I hate when people say this stuff. There's nothing logical about an Irish whip. It doesn't make sense. I'm going to throw you towards the ropes and you're going to come back. Why? Have you ever seen that in mixed martial arts? I've watched Pride, K1, Strike Force. I've watched Shudo. I've watched UWF. I've watched Olympic level judo, Olympic level wrestling. I've watched all kinds of sports. I've never seen anybody grab somebody and throw them and then they came back on their own. Never seen it anywhere outside of pro wrestling. There's a lot of stuff about pro wrestling that's illogical. Let's not take a stand like it should, that should look like the NCAA amateurs, all right? No. And there's a reason why those guys come into pro wrestling and not vice versa. There's a reason why pro wrestling is a work. Because the guys who were real shooters in the past realized we can sit here and beat each other up trying to prove that we're the best, but nobody's going to watch this and nobody cares. But if I help you and you help me, we can put on a good show. We can both get paid. It's just an outgrowth of that, man. It's just an outgrowth of that. So he says, at the end of the day, wrestling ain't that complicated. We don't need to make it complicated. You probably get caught up in here alongside the rest of us because you saw something cool one day on TV or on YouTube. That is what grabs the attention of everyone. Keep enjoying the show. We are glad to have you here. Just remember the basic tenets and hopefully the promotions will remember them in trying times when they go looking for story. At the end of the day, the story has been inside the ring, between the wrestlers, all the time. Oh, wow. Thank you very much for that. It's almost like companies realized if you expand the story beyond the ring, people get more involved to create a more immersive experience. Nobody ever explains anyway how babyfaces and heels can share a locker room and then never come into contact with each other until right when you're in front of each other. Nobody ever asks that question. You know, you go to an arena. Sometimes these arenas only have one locker room. And are you telling me all the knife wielding bad guys, the guys who throw in flame, and they all share a locker room? They're all in there very cordially working together, shaking hands and taking showers and sharing baby pictures, and that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And then after you do all this crazy stuff in front of the camera, you go all the way back to the back anyway. And now the camera's not on you anymore. And, oh, we're back to sharing baby pictures. Let me give you a ride to the next venue. Kayfabe exists to create an immersive experience. All they've really done is expand kayfabe to backstage interviews, personal life stuff. And yeah, they kind of go too far with the magic and everything. Nobody can explain how certain people can do magic, but whatever. Ultimately, pro wrestling is about what's going on in the ring. But what's going on in the ring is sometimes informed by what's going on outside the ring. Okay? Sometimes stuff outside the ring affects things that go on in the ring. Michael Jordan played a basketball game with like 100 fever, 100, degree fever or something like that. That's going to affect how he plays. If a guy is injured, let's say a quarterback, he's got tennis elbow or something like that, it's going to affect how he throws. He still has to play the game, but he might not play as many minutes because he was injured previously. That's the story of the game. Oh, our quarterback, we need to win this game to get into the playoffs, but our quarterback, he's injured. He's got a bad ankle, so he can't scramble like he used to. This guy is saying you shouldn't do that. That's not the story. The game is all that matters. No, they just take the story and expand it. That's all they do. Wrestling is what's going on in the ring. But we want to care about what's in the ring. So there must be something outside of it that informs what's going on inside of it. That's why if you want to book somebody like a monster, like an Omos or somebody like that, you will have him wrestle people who are smaller than he is. You tell that visual story. He throws the guy around. Maybe the guy who is smaller is more experienced and more technical or whatever. Maybe he creates a weakness on Omos, like drop kicking him in his knee. Again, that's the in-ring story. But then there could also be a story about why they're going into that. This little guy has to win this match in order to get into the main event of WrestleMania. And maybe he ended up in this situation because he confronted somebody in the locker room or something like that. The ring is the end part. The 1, 2, 3 doesn't end the story. It could be the beginning. It could be the midpoint. You don't know where that line is unless you analyze the story of the people involved. You could say it's trying to complicate things. It's not really all that complicated. It's actually quite simple. We're trying to get you more involved with what's going on in the ring. So yeah, there may be a guy whose idea of what he's going to do in the ring is informed by his mental state, his injuries, what the other guy has done to him, what he needs to do to this guy in order to win. There's 100 different things there, 1,000 different variables that goes into it. That's what pro wrestling is. Pro wrestling is a pseudo sport. It's a dramatized version of real sports. You might not need the magic, but there's all kinds of basketball players and football players. There's an Olympic runner running around with his fingernails painted. And I think he had like weird stuff in his hair. These things happen, man. There's MMA fighters who have, fought with, fingernails and toenails painted and face paint and all this kind of stuff. There was a guy, it was Alberto Del Rio. He was engaged in MMA fights with wearing a goddamn mask. It's like you have to realize that pro wrestling is a dramatization of real sports. It can be a dramatization of wrestling, actual Olympic wrestling, Greco-Roman or freestyle wrestling, catch-as-catch-can wrestling, right? Which is what you would expect. And then it will look more like UFI in Japan. UWFI, I'm sorry. It will look more like Pride. It will look more like Pancrase. It will look more like Bloodsport, Josh Barnett's Bloodsport. But even those things are kind of dramatized with wrestling moves. Power bombs and suplexes and stuff like this. Stuff that you wouldn't be able to get on somebody in a real fight unless it was a real awkward situation. But I feel well schooled. I feel like he told me something. I should just watch dry-ass Japanese wrestling after this. That's what I feel like I need to do. But what about you? Talk to you guys later.
Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap. They distort, so question as if you worship.